some wine and let's take a sip. Take off all our clothes and let's skinny dipping. Ocean blazing from the leading skates. You say about the apple, so I had to take. You say about the apple, so I had to take. Now the devil holds me for ransom. Never knew temptation was handsome like you.
My track of the week. Isn't the bass line on that completely heavy and amazing? I need a moment to recover.
This is Mobeen Azhar, BBC Asian Network.
Right, people, I hope you're well and I hope you're good and I hope you're having a lovely Monday. Tonight, we are doing one of those shows that I love and passionately believe in. It's one of those shows that is taboo busting and is all about open, honest conversation. We are talking about HIV and what life is like, particularly in a Desi context. When you are diagnosed with HIV, we are talking about why there's so much stigma around it and why so many people still find it such a difficult thing to talk about. And we will be sharing personal experiences. I do want to hear from you. You can text me on 81869. You can tweet at BBC Asian Network. I'd like to welcome to the show Raj. First of all, Raj, are you on the line?
Hey, Mobeen. How are you?
I'm really good, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. So tell me a little bit about your story. Tell me about what happened.
Okay, yeah. So I was diagnosed with HIV in December of 2011.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't expecting it. So the only reason I found out, I was a regular blood donor.
Mm-hmm.
I donated my blood one day as normal.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of weeks later, I had a letter saying, can you give us a call? And when I called, they said, which I looked at. Okay, looked at stuff online, looked at the different things it could be.
Mm-hmm.
Saw HIV as one of them, and I thought, well, no, I'm straight. That won't affect me.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be honest, I didn't, at that point, I don't think I actually knew what HIV and AIDS were. I didn't know there were different things. Didn't really relate. It's only when I went to clinic the next day that the doctor gave me the news.
Right, and then unpacked it. I just wanna focus on one thing in particular there, Raj. So you, at the time, you said you'd been donating blood, you'd been doing that regularly, you'd donated blood, and then you got a letter through saying contact us, and then you knew there was an issue.
Yeah.
When you did then find out that it was HIV, just tell me in those moments, how did you feel and what went through your mind?
To be honest, I was quite numb. I mean, the first thing I asked the doctor was, am I going to die? Because all I could think of, the only thing in my head, was these adverts from the 1980s with the tombstones.
Yes, okay.
And that's all I could think about, because I didn't know anything else. I've never been educated anything differently.
Mm-hmm. I think anyone of a particular age, it's important to reference anyone of a particular age. And I think I watched this recently, actually, still on YouTube. There was a huge awareness campaign in the 80s across Britain around HIV. And I think it specifically used the words AIDS, if I'm remembering correctly. But it had a huge tombstone with the words AIDS with the word AIDS carved out on it. And I think the strapline was along the lines of "Don't die of ignorance." I think that's what it said. And there was a leafleting campaign around it. And I think that was kind of emblazoned onto the mind of a generation. So it's interesting to me that that's the first thing you thought about. And you thought your life was over effectively. And so what was the conversation with the doctor? What happened next?
To be honest, I don't, even to this day, I can't remember a lot of that conversation. Just some reassurance that next steps, getting myself referred and tested properly at a clinic. I think, she did make sure I understood that it was a manageable condition, and that, it wouldn't have any impact, on my life. So that was the one thing I think I took from it.
Was that a relief for you?
I think at that time, I don't think it was at the time. I think at that time I was still I went through a few weeks of denial, I'll be honest. I wanted to pretend that it wasn't right, that they'd made a mistake. Or maybe when I went to clinic, they'd say, "Oh no, it was But I did have a partner, which I'd broken up with recently before, and we were having sex together, and we weren't using protection because she was on the pill.
Right.
It was one partner, so I didn't think that would cause it.
Right. So for you, the protection was more about birth control rather than safer sex?
Yeah.
Right. Do you think a lot of men who identify as straight, especially, would kind of that would come across to them and that would chime true with them?
I think when you are with someone for a while and you trust that person, then you kind of build that trust, and then you can take that step, which is in that case. But I know that I have friends who I've spoken to who won't use protection anyway, which is quite crucial.
Right. Still to this day, they won't use protection.
I mean, I have friends now who I've told, and now they're a bit more careful. But before, I know friends that would just go on one-night stands and just start to question, are you on birth control?
And Raj, I do really appreciate the kind of level of honesty. I really do. I think it's absolutely brilliant that you're talking about this. You made a reference earlier on, and you said that you thought it can't be HIV when they told you that you need to get in contact with them. You'd had this, you donated blood. They said you need to get in contact. You said that you thought it's probably not going to be HIV because you're a straight man.
Yeah.
I think it's really brave of you to say that, because I think probably a lot of people think that way.
I'll be honest, I was very ignorant, and I think when you see a lot of things about HIV, they mention gay people, and even today, I think the awareness isn't there because it's not created, and I think there are straight men living with HIV who don't speak up, and one of the reasons is, even in the HIV sector, all of the support services are thrown at men who have sex with men, and at the African community, and straight men are just, well, where's my help? Where do I go? And I think that kind of stops them speaking up and saying we are here, which then creates that ignorance.
Right. So you mean in terms of the way communities are targeted, do you think straight men are being overlooked?
Yeah. It's not the targeting's not there, the education's not there, and then even post-diagnosis, the support services, because the way they're funded, they target certain communities.
Right. Well, in terms of what happened next, you said that for a while you were just numb and hoping that there'd been some kind of mistake.
Yeah.
Did you then acknowledge that this was something that you would actually have to deal with? And there's a crucial question here. Did you tell the people around you? Did you tell people that you cared about?
Not for a while. I think I told a couple of close friends just so I had someone to speak to. Family-wise, I needed to get everything straight in my own head. So
How did the friends that you told, how did they react?
Mostly good. There was one friend maybe not so good, but maybe not such a good a friend as I was thinking.
What was that response, if you don't mind me asking?
Pretty much told me to get out of his house.
He told you to get out of his house?
Yeah.
I just want to understand, what do you think that was about?
Right, well, his words were, "That's disgusting, get out of my house."
Right, Raj, how did that make you feel?
To be honest, it was quite upset, and for a long time I didn't want to tell anyone else.
Of course. Was this is, as you know, it's the Asian Network, so I just want to understand it, might be completely irrelevant. Was this a Desi friend?
It actually was, yeah.
And do you think that had any influence on why he responded the way he did? I mean, what I'm really asking is, do you think that's a response which should be shared in our communities?
It's a taboo subject that doesn't get discussed, so there's a lack of understanding. I mean, one thing I would like to say, normally when you're with a partner, if they're on medication, like I am, and you're undetectable, you can't transmit the virus.
Of course.
The only reason I contracted HIV, my partner wasn't aware that she had the virus. She
Right.
never tested either, and it's only after that I got diagnosed, she then went for a test and found out.
Right, I completely understand. And do you think at that point, was there a level or was there a conversation ever around the idea that if the two of you had got tested earlier, or if she'd got tested earlier, then, she could have been on medication and she wouldn't have passed it on, perhaps?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm eternally grateful that I was a blood donor, because I wouldn't have known. I could have got really ill, could have even transmitted to someone else. So I'm eternally grateful that I was a blood donor, it got contracted, because there's no way in my mind I would have ever thought to take that test. So I think one message I would say to anyone is, if you are having sex, you need to make sure you're tested. If you're with a new partner, you need to get tested to make sure you're keeping yourself and your partner safe.
Absolutely, Raj. Stick with us. I want to bring in Dr. Rageshri, who is a consultant in HIV medicine at the Royal London Hospital and has worked in sexual health in East London for more than a decade. Welcome. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks.
Are you okay? Oh,
yeah.
You're there. Okay, I had you in the wrong place. There we go. So it's really good to meet you. Thank you so much for coming in today. I want to just really kind of rewind this back and define, first of all, what is HIV?
So that's a really good question to start off with. So HIV is just a virus. That's all it is. It's a virus that's in the blood, and it can be passed on through several ways. So through some bodily fluids. So, for example, if you have sex without condoms, it can be passed on that way. Sometimes it can be passed on from mother to baby. Sometimes it can be passed through contaminated blood transfusions, and if you share needles, it might be passed on that way.
Right.
But it can't be passed on through things like kissing or hugging or sharing toilets or anything like that.
Right, and I guess those are common misconceptions.
Yeah.
Do those misconceptions kind of linger today as well? Do you think people still think in that way?
Definitely. Speaking to some of my patients living with HIV, sometimes even though they know the facts themselves, they still worry about sharing, for example, cutlery with their family and things like that. So I think, they feel that stigma, even though they know the facts. So I think those myths are really still out there.
They're still there.
And in fact, I think there was a national survey done quite recently which showed that quite a large percentage of the UK population still thought that HIV could be passed on just through kissing.
To this day, people still believe that.
Yeah.
That's astounding to me. It really, really is. So tell me, in terms of actually passing it on, am I right? It's through the exchange of bodily fluids, and we're not talking saliva here. We're talking about blood and semen and what else?
Yeah, absolutely. So blood, if the person isn't on HIV treatment. So if they are on treatment, they won't pass it on. So semen through vaginal fluids, sometimes through breast milk, and sometimes from mother to baby at delivery or in pregnancy.
Right, so it's not actually that easy to pass on, is it, really?
No, it's quite hard to pass on. Other viruses are easier to pass on than HIV.
Absolutely. Now, we heard from Raj, who I think was really brave in coming forward and talking about his experience. He said very early on, he said when the hospital got in touch with him where he'd donated blood and they said that there was an issue, what popped into his mind is, it's probably not going to be HIV because Raj identifies as a straight man. Now, the default of that naturally is that HIV is often seen still to this day as something that only affects particular communities. Is that something you deal with a lot in your work?
Definitely. So people never really think they're at risk, and especially heterosexual men and women, so people who are straight, they never think they're at risk. And, you know, even having worked in sexual health clinics over the years and talking to patients about getting an HIV test as part of their checkup, they never, very few think that they are at risk. I think that's changing a little bit, but I think the message still needs to be spread.
Yeah, of course. And how is that work happening in terms of, you know, it's interesting to me that Raj mentioned, he said that he feels that straight men in particular have kind of been left behind, not only in terms of targeting of tests and regular testing and awareness around what HIV is, but also in terms of support services. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, I think so. I think, as you said, a lot of funding goes into campaigning for gay and bisexual men, and also for some heterosexual communities, such as Black Africans, who do have higher rates of HIV than other communities. But recently we did a little study looking at our South Asian patients living with HIV, and half of them were heterosexual men and women, and they were more likely to be diagnosed late than our gay and bisexual men.
Right, I think that's so important to emphasise. So just say that again, in terms of, was it South Asian people that identified as straight were much more likely to be diagnosed late compared to gay men and men who identify as having men who have sex with men?
Yes, so they were much more likely to wait until they were unwell, went to the doctor, and then had the HIV test.
So unpack that for us. Is that because effectively you've got a section of the population, you've got straight people, straight South Asians, who are thinking, this isn't going to affect me?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so why have an HIV test, whereas a gay or bisexual man might be more likely to have a routine sexual health screen when they're feeling well. Straight men and women might be waiting until they are unwell, and then their GP, for example, may suggest, let's do HIV as part of the test that we need to do.
Right, and that will have massive implications, won't it? Because if they're diagnosed later, so they were unaware of their HIV status, they're much more likely then to have passed the virus on, because they won't be on any medication, so their viral load could still be high. They're much more infectious.
Absolutely. So we know that most HIV is passed on by people who don't know they have HIV, so they're not on treatment, as you said. Yeah.
That's really problematic. I want to continue this conversation in a moment. We'll be hearing from Mina as well, and we'll also be hearing from Shamal, who is someone else who's been living with HIV for quite some time. This is Mobeen Azhar. It's just gone after 10:30. I do want to hear from you. You can get in touch on 81869. You can tweet at BBC Asian Network. Get involved.
खिचदी हॉट बड़ी लगदी फिकर तेरी तनी पई नी कोई दिल जीत ना गाना कर लेनी मॉडल बनी पई नी लगदा मिक्स करिए रब ने हाय ऐश करी नानी नी लग तेरे पतले वास्ते बनिया टॉमी दिया जीना नी लग तेरे पतले वास्ते बनिया टॉमी दिया जीना नी लग तेरे पतले वास्ते बनिया चौंकी तेरे लिए जीप कटाली खाकी कैमोफ्लेज जैकेटा पाउंदी पिटबुल रखिया करन नूं राखी सुनिया ऑफ रोडिंग दी चौंकी तेरे लिए जीप कटाली खाकी रात नूं तड़के तेरे लिए तड़के यार दा सीना नी लग तेरे पतले वास्ते बनिया टॉमी दिया जीना नी इंस्टा हो गया ओवरलोड फोटोआं चकवियां पाउंदी ठुकदा लाइक ते कुड़िए लाइक स्लोमो विच तू क्लिप जाते पाउंदी इंस्टा हो गया ओवरलोड फोटोआं चकवियां ਵੱਡੇ ਵਾਲ ਸੂਟ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸ਼ੌਲ ਪਸ਼ਮੀਨਾ ਨੀ ਲੱਕ ਤੇਰੇ ਪਤਲੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਬਣੀਆਂ ਟੌਮੀ ਦੀਆਂ ਜੀਨਾਂ ਨੀ ਲੱਕ ਤੇਰੇ ਪਤਲੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਬਣੀਆਂ ਟੌਮੀ ਦੀਆਂ ਜੀਨਾਂ ਨੀ ਲੱਕ ਤੇਰੇ ਪਤਲੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਬਣੀਆਂ ਟੌਮੀ ਦੀਆਂ ਜੀਨਾਂ ਨੀ ਲੱਕ ਤੇਰੇ ਪਤਲੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਬਣੀਆਂ
Ma'am Yassa, hello. I like to get you home with all the best tunes. I'm talking Bollywood, Bhangra, and British Asian bangers. Plus, every Friday, I count down the official Asian music chart.
On BBC Asian Network.
Weekday afternoons from 4. BBC Asian Network.
Mobeen Azhar.
Indeed it is. This is Mobeen Azhar and I'm with you till midnight. And tonight we are talking about living with HIV. There still seems to be, I would say this is probably it's the front line when it comes to desi health and taboos. We are so eager to talk about diabetes. Like, we just love talking about diabetes. Get a couple of aunties, a couple of uncles in a supermarket, and we will compare notes on diabetes and sugar till we have had every part of the conversation. Heart attacks, cancer, everything else we love talking about. But when it comes to HIV, just silence, because complete silence when it comes to HIV. And so tonight what we want to do is really explore what that's about, get some facts, and also do some taboo busting and understand what life is like and how manageable it is if you are living with HIV, and also explore why getting tested regularly is important and how you can have safer sex as well. I've got Raj with me still. So Raj, you were talking a little bit earlier about getting your blood test done and then effectively being told, well, you went to donate blood actually, didn't you, rather than having a test? And then you were told that there was an issue and you were diagnosed. You explained that when you told close friends, some of them were really understanding, but one of them asked you to leave his house, effectively. So after that then, what happened next? When did you kind of feel comfortable enough to start telling family?
I think it was about, I think, a year till I told my mum.
It was a year?
Yeah.
Why was it a year, Raj?
I wasn't sure what to say. I think I still was processing a lot in my own mind. I think it just got to the point where I need to start owning this now. I need to take steps to make sure that I'm controlling this and it's not controlling me anymore.
Of course, Raj, were you scared?
I think a bit, yeah.
What were you scared of?
Next steps, what would happen, how she'd react, what impact it would have on her as well.
And when you did have that conversation, can you remember? I mean, did you go round? Did you go round to her house?
Yeah.
Right. So you went round, and what words? And I don't know, Raj. Are you is your background? Are you Punjabi?
Yeah, I'm Punjabi.
So was the conversation in Punjabi or was it in English?
Yeah, it was in Punjabi.
And
bit of English.
Bit of English in there as well. What did you actually say?
I kind of just sat down and I said, look, there's no easy way to say this. This is what's happened. I was seeing someone at the time. She came with me, helped me talk it through. I had some literature ready for her to read. But it wasn't... she had some idea what it all meant because she does social work.
Right, okay. So there was a context, kind of, she knew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was, a lot of it was shock. She went, how did this happen? What did you do? I think one thing is like, you're educated, this shouldn't happen to you. And I think that's a big stigma in the Asian community. It's like, it only happens to people of a certain lifestyle.
Right.
I think that's the thing. I think that's what a few people have said to me, but you're educated and you're this, and you're a professional. But yeah, I think that, and it was just, I think it was shock for a few days, but overall she's been quite supportive.
Right, so then she moved on to being supportive. Have you got siblings or kind of broader family? How did they respond?
When I told my brother, the first thing he said was, "You're stupid and you should have told me earlier." I think he was more annoyed that I didn't tell him.
Right.
Than what had happened.
Yeah. I understand. Raj,
I didn't know, and
yeah, I hear you, Raj. I think it's just really, really brave of you to speak about this. I really do. So stick with us. And if you're listening to this, you can contribute anonymously as well. So, you can get in touch with us and just share your stories. You can text us on 81869. You can tweet at BBC Asian Network. I want to bring in Shamal now. Shamal, welcome to the Asian Network. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good, thank you. So tell me a little bit about yourself. I know you've been living with HIV, haven't you?
Yeah, so I've been living with HIV now for about 5 years. It wasn't a very easy journey in the first part, but now I've come to a point where I'm very comfortable with my HIV status, very much in control of the virus, and I now educate and empower other people who may be affected by HIV or living with HIV to live the best life that they can, and to kind of abolish those stigmas that we have around it, because I think there's a lot of miseducation and a lot of misunderstanding around what HIV means today in 2019 and how you can live a near normal, if not better, quality of life with the virus if you have acquired it.
I hear that. So I want to go back. You said you've been living with HIV for about 5 years?
Yes,
so
2013, 14, yeah.
2013, 14. So take me back to then, and take me back to when you were diagnosed, and how were you diagnosed? Did you go for kind of routine check? You know, Raj was talking about donating blood and then being told. How were you diagnosed?
So I was always very in control of going to the sexual health clinic quite often, so I would be very proactive about going regularly, getting tested regularly. So it was just offbeat that I knew that I was coming up to a time when I needed to be tested. Had no inkling that it would be HIV. It was just a general test that I went for. And I was actually just speaking to some colleagues about it the other day, particularly about my story, and how in that moment, I think what actually took over was my culture and my religion and the shame around that and what it would actually mean to be HIV. Because I think I was aware of HIV and that being there and being sexually tested on a regular basis. But for me, I just felt this is it. This is like an ultimate sin because it's kind of associated, I suppose, with sex, and sex is quite a big taboo in our culture. How am I going to tell everybody?
No, sex is a taboo. No way!
People are going to automatically judge me. People are going to automatically assume this is how I've acquired it. What am I going to do? How am I going to tell my friends? How am I going to tell my family? All of those things just came into my mind. And
sure.
You know, I was never really taught about sex education. Sex is kind of just, you learn about these things as you go along. So I was like, how am I supposed to even open these conversations? All I wanted to do was the ground open up and swallow me up and not think about anything else.
Gosh, okay, so there's quite a lot to unpack there. So in terms of, you said kind of culture and religion took over. So tell me, what is your cultural and religious background? What's your heritage?
So, South Asian, so father's Pakistani, mum's Indian Gujarati, Muslim born, so from a very conservative Islamic, partly liberal, but when it comes down to it, they are very, very conservative Muslims who read Namaz and
they read Namaz and all the rest of it. And I want to just compare notes with Raj as well in a second, but Shamal, so in that context, in terms of your sex life, is that something that was a secret as well? Was it kind of... was it a don't ask, don't tell, or was it a...
It was just my... sex life, I don't think anybody really discussed it in the community. We wouldn't really talk about it. I think in the Western community, as a British man, yes, I'd talk about it with my peers, but never would I be able to talk about it at home. Never would I be able to talk about it in the community that I was from. Even now, so the work that I do, I work in HIV, in the sex and in sexual health, and it's not the kind of conversation I can have in my community. If I go home at Eid, I want to kill the conversation, I'll start talking about sexual health, and I'll start talking about my job. That's just the way my community works.
That's going to happen next week. Eid Mubarak. Let's talk about sexual health.
I've had doctors and stuff when they ask me, they go, "Oh, you're working now for the NHS?" What? And they just look at me baffled, going, "Of all the medical professions, you decided to go into sexual health. Why?" I think there's almost a connotation you must be involved in sex work, or that's where the idea comes from. It. So people just don't want to talk about it. So it becomes harder to even discuss the aspect of sexual health and HIV, let alone get to HIV, because there is a stigma. Is that the main way you can get HIV?
This is super important. I just want to bring Raj in. Raj, with you, in terms of your sex life and the fact that you said you were with a particular woman at the time. Do you think in terms of friends, family, peers, do you think everyone knew you were having sex and you were in a relationship, or do you think even that bit was taboo? And again, what is your background? I know you're Punjabi.
Yeah, I'm Sikh.
You're
so
Sikh,
I think
Punjabi.
Friends and peers, like parents and elders. Oh no, you things with your elders. You don't mention things like that. It's taboo, and it's
Of course. Yeah. Did that mean then, the reason I ask and the reason I think it's relevant is, did that mean when you did then have to come forward and say, okay, there's something I need to tell you, there's something significant in my life, I'm HIV positive, did that mean there was an added stigma to deal with? Because you're not just dealing with being HIV positive and everything that comes with that, you're also holding your hand up and saying, yes, I'm having sex, and yes, that's part of my life.
I think I haven't spread it that much in the community. A lot of that is to do with the stigma. And as you know, as an Asian child, if there is any issues, you don't take the flak. Your parents take the flak.
That is
and
true.
I don't want to put them through that. But the people I have told, like slightly older people in the Asian community, scarily, it was always the same first question. Did you go sleep with a prostitute?
That was the first question.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so when someone... and who would this be? Like people in the community?
Yeah, like I told... I'll be honest, I told told someone in Ocky Health at work who was an Asian person, that was Christian. And I actually had a go at him for that. And I had to sit there and educate him, saying, if this ever happens again, you do not ask that question.
Of course. Well, and was he receptive?
Yeah.
He was receptive. Shamal, let me bring you back in. So, you know, when you were diagnosed, who did you speak to? Was it a difficult process? Because you said you were you just had this reaction where everything was about culture and religion. And I think you used the word punishment. You thought it was a punishment.
Yeah, it's sort of shame, I think. There was a lot of shame associated with it. Just going off what Raj was saying, I think our community, we kind of associate almost a stigma around it. If you've contracted HIV, you're either gay, you're either been with sex workers, or you are a sex worker, or you're using drugs. And those are the three things. And mainly around sex, around with sex workers or being gay. And I think that was the one thing that I was just not wanting to bring up, because we don't discuss sex anyway, so there was a lot of shame around that. And I thought the best way to think about this was to just bury my head in the sand and not think about it at all. This is not something that is affecting me. And then just being aware of the fact that I had contracted it and that I needed to engage with my clinic and my doctors, because I knew I had to go onto medication. But the easiest way was to just shut myself out and not think about it. And I did that for almost 2 years, and I didn't tell anyone.
2 years? I thought you were going to say a few weeks.
No.
2 years.
2 years.
So what was going on? That must have been really difficult in that 2-year period, because there's this thing which is a kind of massive, life-changing thing.
Yeah.
Of course it is. And it's exactly the kind of thing where you'd want to speak to people and get their support and, have a conversation.
Yeah.
You didn't feel able to do that.
No, I think it was just really hard for me, myself, to accept it, because I had thought, okay, this is it. This is a sin of some kind I've done, because it's associated with something sexual, which is a sin anyway, and is forbidden in our religion and our culture, and I'm going to go to hell, and this is my punishment. I just have to accept it. And I was trying to just find the right way to kind of explain it and even kind of figure it out for myself. So it took me to a very, very dark place, and it was only when going to those places that I thought something needs to change. I need to either accept it or embrace it, or I need to start telling people. And through the support of my doctors and counsellors that I worked with, I eventually got there. But yeah, it was very,
Was
very
there
hard.
a particular catalyst? I don't know if you can put it down to one thing, but was there a particular thing where you thought, okay, I'm ready to have this conversation now. I'm ready and to take this forward.
Yeah, it was quite dark. I was contemplating suicide. I thought this is the only way out, is I need to end my life. And I think coming again from an Islamic background where a cousin of mine did commit suicide, and the way he was ostracized from the community, I was like, well, again, that's another sin. So I can't even do that. I can't even win. So I'm going to have to figure out a way to accept this and start telling those people that are close around me. Otherwise, I think they were the ones that would have to suffer if I wasn't around.
Shamal, I think it's incredibly brave of you. I really do. I think it's such a needed conversation. Now, at that point, when effectively you're saying you're thinking about suicide, and you're thinking, okay, actually, the alternative here is I need to start talking to people.
Yeah.
How do you take that first step at that point? Who do you call? What do you even do?
So I told my long-term partner at the time, and we just had a discussion about it, because I thought they were going to throw me out, and I'd be out on the streets, and I wouldn't be, I'd just been in a really, really bad place, but I was just ready to take the plunge. So I told them, and then it was just a catalyst from there. Then I started telling some really close friends, my sister-in-law, my brother and sister-in-law, and the reaction was actually quite calm, and they were all like, well, why didn't you tell us? Why did you have to suffer for so long? And I realised it was a lot more about me accepting it first before I could tell them. And then things just kind of positively went, and I started figuring out what it meant to have the virus. Started going onto medication, knowing that the medication would suppress the virus for me, so I wouldn't be able to pass it on to anyone else, and that it would in turn keep my immune system in check. So did all of that.
Did it feel like a weight had been lifted?
Absolutely. It was like the biggest weight off my shoulders, because it was something that was really like pushing me down for a long time. So to be able to just accept that and have other people know that I was HIV positive was just a really liberating experience. 'Cause for so long I'd kind of just kept it to myself and just kind of gone into a bit of a shell.
Did anyone respond negatively, really?
Not really. I think by the time I started telling, because I came out quite publicly, so when I did start to tell the most closest in the family, I did get a few people go, "Oh, why did you come out this way?" As in come out online and bring out.
You did it online?
Yes.
You missed that bit out. What do you mean you came out online?
So I did
that bombshell, isn't there?
So I did a BBC Stories feature last year.
Okay.
And I came
which
out
I've seen.
publicly.
Yes.
Which I came out publicly.
But I didn't realise that
was me.
No. I realised it was you, but I didn't realise that was how you informed people. I thought you'd had a conversation kind of prior to that.
So I told the closest around me, which is my partner, a couple of close friends, and my brother and sister-in-law. I told those people around me, and I was basically working in a sexual health charity, HIV charity, a really well-known one, and I used to find it really hard to be able to empower and provide that knowledge to people around me, clients who would come, but as soon as I left that space, I would find it really difficult to be able to talk about HIV. So I wanted to take control back, and I was like, this is the only way I'm going to do it. So I decided to come out with my story of living with HIV.
I love when you mention it, you smile.
I do.
Yeah. Is that because, was it a bit like ripping off a band-aid? Do you know what I mean? Was it a bit like, I'm just going to do it, and then it's done, it's out there?
It was just like the biggest breath of fresh air I'd ever taken, because it was just hard keeping it inside you and having that conversation over and over and over again. It's a difficult conversation. It's not one that you can take back. You don't just lightly say to somebody, I'm HIV positive, and go, oh, forget about it, we don't need to talk about it. Once it's out there, it's out there. So I thought the best way for me to do it, and to serve my community and to have some visibility, is to be able to talk about it. We should be talking about this because this can affect anyone, regardless of what gender you are, what race you are, what sexuality, what background you're from. And our South Asian community need to be a bit more aware of it, because I'm now aware that in our communities, especially going back home to South Asia, the HIV rates have gone up and doubled.
Of course.
So it's something that the community needs to be talking about, so that they are being responsible and getting tested, and knowing that once you are tested, there are prevention methods and treatment, which is really, really good. And just understanding that, put everything aside, if you are affected by HIV or you do contract it, it's not the end of the world. And I think a lot of people just go into a shell because of the stigma and the shame.
Of course they do. At that point then, when you kind of so publicly came out in this way and said, okay, this is something that I'm living with, these are the facts of it, did you feel that you'd in some ways become like a poster boy for South Asians living with HIV?
I wish I could say that was the case. I've just actually been talking with an organisation this week, and we're trying to target the South Asian community with a sexual health campaign. And one of the big things is, how are we going to do it in a respectful way? Because we are at a point with the South Asian community where they are not reacting very well to things like LGBT issues, let alone sexual health and talking about sex. How are we going to do this in a really comfortable and kind of respectful manner? If I wanted to be, I was hoping that it would start those conversations around it. But the one thing I found is I got lots of people around me saying, oh, you're really inspiring, you're really brave, just like you. But it was the Asian community and the Muslim community who perhaps gave me the worst reaction. They said some really horrible things, and there was either a wall of silence or there was a lot of abuse. And I mean, I could take it, it's totally fine, but it was quite
it's not fine though. The fact is, it's absolutely not fine. It's really
it's totally not fine. But in terms of, I thought, I'm going to take it and just move on, because at least if they're acknowledging it and they're reading about it, this is something that they haven't done in a long time. Because the article was actually printed out in BBC Urdu as well, so it got a bigger reach. And just the comments on it were quite.
But I'm really, and please don't answer this if you don't want to answer it. But when you say the comments were a bit out, what were the comments?
I don't know if I can say some of them.
You can say anything you want on this show.
It's like, you're an ugly packy, you're a sand nigger, terms I'd never heard before, but just horrible, just really horrible racist stuff, or that you deserve this because of your lifestyle, you're too Western, you're this, you're that. And people going onto my Twitter, because I'm quite open on social media, and just judging me by that, going, that's basically your lifestyle and that's what you were going to get. And, you know, those fears that came to me when I was first diagnosed, this is my destiny and this is what was always going to happen because this is what I was told. If this kind of behaviour continued or we did this, you know, you'd end up shameful and in hell. Well, it's not actually true. You know, this is a living example of somebody who's doing fine from it, and that we need to kind of look at the bigger picture rather than stigmatise each other and push people to certain places where they can go to really dark places.
I think that's really true. And Shamal, it raises such an important point because of course we're talking about HIV today, but we're also talking about awareness. And when you talk about awareness, there's a context, I think, within Desi communities. And that context, as you point out, and as Raj, you know, referenced as well, if we're still in a place where we are not willing to have an open, honest conversation, not able to have an open, honest conversation around even being sexually active. And then, as you point out, we're not really having an honest conversation around LGBTQ issues. Then it's almost like that's a precursor to being able to have honest, open conversations around sexual health and HIV. But those things, you know, the world keeps turning and things keep happening, so we need to just kind of have that conversation. It absolutely just has to happen.
I think it's so important. I think the stuff that's been happening in Birmingham, I see a lot of the parents and they're specifically talking about sexual and relationship education and going, our kids are too young to know about this. But, you know, the context that that's been used in is talking about relationships and what sexual relationships are in terms of consent, in terms of being aware, you know, what your body is and that your body is yours, and if somebody touches it, things like that. And they're quite simply saying, oh, well, they don't need to be taught at that age. We can teach them. We're teaching them at home. It's not happening. When I was 6, 7, that kind of stuff was not happening. No one was talking to me about it. So you're not talking to about it with your kids, which is why it's a responsibility now. And the government has said that they are going to implement it. I mean, at the moment, I'm quite worried because the South Asian community and religious communities are not reacting very well to it, particularly religious communities. And it is going to become compulsory next year. So what are we going to do? Because we need to start having these conversations now.
Absolutely.
About sex relationships and HIV and all those things that affect us.
So let us come back to this in a second. And after, it's just gone 11 o'clock. And in a moment when we come back, we're going to be talking about where we are in terms of medicine, because there was a time where HIV was seen as a death sentence. That is absolutely no longer the case. It is now manageable. Early detection is actually key. And so we're going to be talking about how we can raise awareness and how we can get more early detection and how it's manageable. We're going to hear more from Shamal as well. This is a former track of the week. It's called Mama. It's by Ravina Aurora.
Dreams.
to the very end because I really respect the birds that are chirping at the end of that. There is a former track of the week. It's Ravina Aurora. It's called Mama. This is Mobeen Azhar live from the BBC Asian Network. Tonight we are talking about living with HIV, and we're sharing personal experiences, and we're also going to talk now about managing when you were living with HIV, because there was a time where it was perceived widely as the end of your life. That is no longer the case. There has been massive advancements in terms of managing HIV and treatment, and now you can have a very long life, and you can be partnered, you can take medication, which effectively means you're not infectious, which is amazing. There have been huge advancements, so we're going to be talking about that in a moment. I want to draw your attention now to a chat we had a little bit earlier with a woman who is the Policy and Campaigns Manager for the National AIDS Trust. Here we go.
My name is Cheryl Gower, and I'm the Policy and Campaigns Manager for National AIDS Trust. HIV can affect anyone, so there's sometimes a stereotype that it only affects gay men, for example, but actually it can affect anyone. There are about 3,500 South Asians living with HIV in the UK, and about half of them are men who have sex with men, or sometimes called MSM, and half of them are heterosexual. There are about 100,000 people with HIV living in the country today. It's mainly amongst MSM communities and people from Black African communities, but that's because that's where the burden of HIV is. So the more people, the higher the prevalence among those communities, the higher the likelihood that you're going to get HIV if you're having sex with people in those communities. Most people who have HIV in the UK, including South Asians, are undetectable, so they can't pass the virus on. And there's not much you can't do, really. You can actually live a very normal life. So there are some things. You can't donate blood, for instance, and there's very limited organ donations. So some people living with HIV can donate organs, but that will only be to other people living with HIV. In terms of occupations, there used to be occupational restrictions, but now very much less so. So you can't be frontline in the military just because of difficulties or potential difficulties with access to your medication. So there's nothing about fear of transmitting HIV to anyone else. That's just about whether you can access your medication. With some occupations, there are some restrictions. So if you're a healthcare worker, for example, you'll have to have viral load testing to see how much HIV you have in your body if you're doing certain procedures. But basically, you can just live a normal life if you have HIV with a normal life expectancy. I think the main reason behind the stigma around HIV is just lack of awareness and lack of understanding. And one of the problems is that HIV isn't really a part of relationships and sex education in school. So people don't really understand about HIV. People don't understand how it gets passed on. People don't understand you can live a normal life with HIV. So I think people tend to be fearful of the things they don't understand, and that's the problem with HIV, and that's why the stigma gets developed. There's also a bit of a taboo around sex. We find it very difficult to talk about sex, and people become uncomfortable. There's a general societal stigma around HIV, so people will read things in the media, stories about people with HIV, which tend to be very stigmatizing. But then there's also stigma within the community, within the family, and I think maybe that's where people from the South Asian community feel it most. And actually probably within any community, anyone feels it most from their community or their family, maybe their religious leaders. If they feel a fear about testing, or if they feel fear of people thinking they have HIV, that's where the stigma can be most profound. The stigma is prevalent across all communities. I don't think it's specifically a thing for the South Asian community, but the actual specific manifestation of how it transpires, it will be community specific. So, for example, some people might fear going to their GP if their GP is someone who's known to them in their community, and actually perhaps those communities with stronger bonds, people might be more fearful of people thinking they have HIV. But one of the things about the South Asian community is that whereas with other communities we're seeing a decrease in new diagnoses, within the South Asian community diagnoses have actually remained very consistent for the last 10 years or so. So they're not very high. There's about 250 diagnoses per year, but actually it's been the same for years and years, whereas in other communities it is actually starting to fall. So we're conscious that people aren't getting tested. What we do know about the South Asian community is that they're the ethnic community with the lowest uptake of HIV testing. So partly that's about people not being offered tests in sexual health services, but also partly that's people not taking up those tests when they're offered them. the sooner you're diagnosed, the better your outcomes will be, the better your health outcomes, and also the better the public health outcomes are as well. So it's very important for people to get tested because so that they can access treatment. But we also need to think about service provision, and it's important that service provision is changed so that it meets the needs of the South Asian population.
That was Cheryl there from the National AIDS Trust. Dr. Ragishi, I was just astounded there by some of the figures in regards to South Asian communities and testing in particular. Can you unpack that a little bit for us? Is it just people are not getting tested? Is it that simple?
I think that is the case. I think we know from research that South Asians are less likely to attend sexual health clinics than people of other ethnicities, and they may be perhaps less likely to talk to their doctor about HIV, so for example going to their GP to ask for a test. So those stats don't surprise me at all, unfortunately, and it does feel that as a community we are falling behind in terms of our new diagnosis rates staying the same.
It's amazing to me, though, because culturally, as I referenced earlier, things like diabetes are kind of part of our vocabulary. So every second person diagnoses themselves with diabetes and then goes to the doctor and says, I think I'm diabetic, or, I might be arthritic. These things are conversations we have. But when it comes to HIV, is it just because it's perceived as it's to do with sex? Is that what it comes like? Is that what the stigma's about?
I think it is. I think there is because it's to do with sex. I think there's a lot of shame associated with an HIV diagnosis, or even saying that you've gone to have a test. So people probably wouldn't say to their friends, for example, oh, I had an HIV test yesterday, whereas they might say I went to my GP and had my blood pressure checked or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think
BP high, BP low.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it is that because it is to do with sex.
I can completely imagine. Raj, what is your take on that? Do you think ultimately, because I know you told us earlier, you found out about your HIV status because you were donating blood, not because you were having an STI checkup.
Yeah.
Now, do you think more broadly we're just, as a community, we're not doing this stuff because we just, I don't know, don't want to get seen at the clinic, or the GP might be your uncle? Do you know what I mean? Is that what it comes down to?
It is. I mean, there's a lot of, you don't want to be seen going in and out of that gum clinic. There's actually, when you're with your mates, there's jokes about, oh, I saw him coming out of the gum clinic yesterday, or, which is that's where you check for STIs.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of the stigma is I don't want to be seen in there. But the good thing is now, in this day and age, there's a lot of home tests you can do. You can order your test at home that comes in this room. And then you send that back and get your results, which hopefully, if that's what someone's worry is about testing, you can go home test kit.
Yeah, okay, so if someone's listening to this and they're afraid of being seen by Auntie G or Uncle G at the gum clinic, they can just get online and they can get that tests sent to them.
Yeah, and make sure you look for the kite mark and the proper BSI registration, but yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Raj. I want to bring in now Meena Kakaya, who works in mental health and well-being, and she's a coach and an author, and she's done lots of work with South Asian women in particular around HIV. Meena, I think it's very telling that for tonight we wanted to speak to a woman living with HIV of South Asian descent. And we couldn't find someone to speak openly about it. I think at one point we had someone who then had a wobble. Right. But I think that's really, really telling. Do you think there's a particular stigma around South Asian women living with HIV?
I think it's South Asian women and all women, actually, because I think there's a cultural pressure in relation to the stigma associated with having HIV. Mm-hmm. And, the work that I've done working in groups and workshops with Asian women, African women, all different community women, is the fact that the fear of rejection, of not meeting a partner after having it, not becoming a mother, or not getting married maybe, and it's those barriers that their life is over, and it's shifting that attitude that they have their own negative attitudes, which I think you shared, you picked up on, and I think that it's breaking some of those attitudes and perceptions and beliefs around HIV for themselves, because the fear of being rejected by the community, but also themselves having the shame and guilt that they hold and the beliefs they hold around it, and the fear of being rejected by the community or not accepted or valued.
So it's I guess it's the same as when we talk about internalized like a form of self-loathing or internalized homophobia. It's the same thing where we as a community think, you know, as Shamal said earlier, your original kind of response was this is a punishment. So it's almost like your programming had told you that you had done something wrong. So I mean, with a lot of the women you work with, it's the same thing.
It's actually universal, because all the community groups I've worked with, the experience is all the same. It's those emotions, this emotional journey they go through of fear, helplessness, anger, shame and guilt. And often what tends to happen is they become very isolated. And a lot of the women that I've worked with in some of the charities I've worked with around with groups is they haven't told anybody for years.
They just haven't told anyone.
They're actually struggling because they haven't told anybody. And when they do, as you were saying, Shamal, then it becomes a relief. It's like, and they often get that support through peer support programs that some of these organisations, charities do. And then I run workshops around building emotional resilience, which is really about understanding your own emotional journey around HIV and what your beliefs that you hold around HIV, which can be self-stigmatizing for you, which actually creates a barrier for you. So it's about shifting individuals and people living with HIV to shifting that attitude. Like we say, you are able to lead a normal life. You can get married and have kids, and women have, Asian women and other women are marrying negative men and having children, meaningful lives and getting on with their lives. And, you lead a normal life. And I think it's about changing the story.
Right.
We started with the beginning. The story was it's a death sentence. We had that stereotype of the 1980s that you're gay or but you got to remember the Asian community, our South Asian community, is just as diverse as all communities. You're human beings. So we are diverse ourselves, and we also are not immune to HIV. And I think when people get diagnosed, the women I've worked with, it's like what you were saying. How come it happened to me? I'm heterosexual. I don't fit that stereotype or that group. So it's a shock for them. But then it's also about it's also about getting them to understand and shifting their belief that you are still you.
Of course.
But what they do is they get caught up in the label of HIV and all the connotations and the stereotypes that society has fed into, that we already had a conversation about. But also yourself, you have this internal dialogue around shame and guilt as well.
It's the trappings of what is already established.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Regation, could we talk about managing HIV? Because I think there's a real deficit in understanding just how far we've come. It is fair to say now, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but HIV is entirely manageable.
Definitely.
Tell me, how is it manageable? How does it work? What advancements have we made?
So we started getting effective treatment in 1997, so it's been over 20 years now. And in terms of treatment, we now know that people can have a normal life expectancy if they're diagnosed early and put on treatment before their immune system has a chance to get damaged.
So I think it's really important to just repeat that, a normal life expectancy.
A normal life expectancy. And there is even some studies that say perhaps it's a longer life expectancy, because when people go to clinic, they're being checked for things like diabetes and high blood pressure, and it's being picked up sooner than it might have been if they didn't have HIV.
Right.
So, people are managed really well. And treatment is just really easy now. So at the beginning, it was a lot of tablets, there were lots of side effects, but now most people are on just 1 or 2 tablets a day. They don't need to go to their clinic more than every 6 months to have blood tests. And, and HIV is just a small part of their lives, so they can live really well with HIV.
Completely. Can we speak about PrEP and PEP for a second?
Yeah.
And I just want to give you a bit of context. So I always do a handover before the show with Bobby Friction, who's on air before me. So we have a little conversation about what's coming up tonight. And Bobby is a friend of mine, and he's very knowledgeable, and he's a man of the world. And it was really interesting to me because in the chat today, I said, tonight we're going to be talking about HIV, and we're also going to be talking about PrEP and PEP. And I saw his face, and I said, and this was on air, and I said, do you know what that is? And he went, do, actually. And that was amazing to me because, you know, Bobby is someone that I think is really well informed. And that just made me think how many of us as a community across Britain are not aware what PrEP and PEP are. So, Doctor, help me out here. Tell us about PrEP and PEP.
Sure. I'm going to start off with PEP just because it's been around for a bit longer, and that stands for post-exposure prophylaxis. And what that is a course of HIV medication that you take within 3 days if you've been at risk of getting HIV. So if you've had unprotected sex with someone who has HIV, for example, and isn't on treatment, or if you're working healthcare and you've had a needle stick incident with someone from HIV. So that's started within 3 days. It's a course of HIV medication that you take for 4 weeks, and it massively reduces your chances of getting HIV.
I heard it described, and tell me if you think this is the wrong way to describe it, but someone I know described it as the morning after pill for HIV. Is that an adequate?
That's a really good way of saying it, because PrEP we think about as being the oral contraceptive pill, so you could think of it and PrEP in that way as well. So it's like the morning after pill. Again, you need to take it within 3 days or 72 hours, and it massively reduces your chance of getting HIV or getting pregnant if you're having the morning after pill.
Do we know? I don't know if there's any research on this, and Shamal, you might know about this. Raj, any one of you might know about this. Is there any research on the uptake of pre-exposure prophylaxis? So that's PrEP, isn't it?
Yes.
The uptake of PrEP amongst Desi communities.
Probably quite limited unless you were looking at the impact trial, because I think that's the best way that people can access PrEP in the UK, well, in England specifically. So I don't know, have you come across any statistics, Doctor?
I haven't seen any statistics yet. So as you said, PrEP is pre-exposure prophylaxis, and it's a tablet that you can take before you're at risk of getting HIV. So you could take it every day, like having the oral contraceptive pill, which stops you getting pregnant. PrEP stops you getting HIV. At the moment in England, you can access it through a big trial, so you can go to your sexual health clinic and ask to get put on the trial. I know that in terms of uptake of the trial, they are trying to get people from ethnic minority backgrounds because they're less likely to take up PrEP. So certainly people from minority ethnic backgrounds are less likely to be on PrEP through the trial, so I would assume that's South Asians as well.
Completely. And Raj, can I ask you, you know, earlier you said that you were having safer sex, but then you stopped using condoms because for you it was about managing, well, not having babies, it was about birth control, effectively. At the time, if you'd maybe been a bit more informed, would PrEP have been an option for you? Would you have taken PrEP?
I would have considered it if I thought I was at risk, yeah. But I think more importantly at the time, I would have gone for that test.
Right.
More aware.
So for you, it's about you would have just got tested more regularly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. Shamal, what about for you with your... I'm asking about... Yes, I am asking about your sex life.
No, would you? I'm quite open about my sex life.
Yeah, would you have taken PrEP?
Do you know what? I've been working in the sector for quite a while now, and again, this question has come up many times to me, and I think a lot of the times I probably wouldn't take PrEP. Right. And one of the biggest reasons is that shame associated with it. Every time, because PrEP is a contraceptive pill that you take 24 hours before and after having sex, condomless sex. So the idea of I'm going to take a pill now because it's going to stop me from potentially getting HIV is way too much for my brain to handle, and it's going to bring up all those things around. I'm going to be promiscuous now. Am I doing the right thing? And I think that's the problem, because, you know, in our culture, as from a young age, we're brought up around this whole izzat and honour and thing, and we're not supposed to abolish that or do anything against that. Shame is so embedded in us from such a young age that it's really, really hard to kind of look past that. So when anything comes up, it's just easy to go, no, I'm not going to think about it, or I'm not going to talk about it, or we're not going to discuss it. So Shamal, that's a problem.
This is fascinating to me. So I just want to be really precise here and understand. Yeah. So are you saying a few years ago you wouldn't have taken PrEP, but now would you, or do you think you're still battling?
No. I think if I was HIV negative, I'd probably now be taking it. But I speak to a lot of people, especially from the South Asian communities, guys especially, who have gone on to say the impact trial, and it's only because they've learnt about it because they've had a mishap around HIV or they've been at risk of it. But not many people in the Asian community are getting the education around what PrEP is, and I think there's almost with the campaigns that are going out are very much focused on it's about being able to not to have condomless sex and be able to not acquire HIV, but it's still associated with sex. So I think that's the problem, is in our culture, in South Asian communities, we don't want to talk about sex, so we don't really want to discuss that, because condoms have been there for years and we've been using them, so the narrative's there. But to bring in a new pill that basically it's like the contraceptive pill in the 70s. So we just need to come up with some kind of education campaign so that South Asian communities can just be a little bit more liberated and take it on.
Absolutely. It's interesting the reference to condoms, because I was in Lahore a few months ago, and in a shop I saw mango flavour condoms, which I thought, okay, how kind of progressive and lovely, and it's the national fruit, so isn't that really nice? But I didn't hear any conversation around PrEP. I know, I think it is available in Pakistan now and in India. But if you look at India, I've got some figures here. India has the third largest HIV epidemic in the world, with over 2 million people living with HIV. It's high time that PrEP and PEP are rolled out. I think it is being trialled. I want to just refer, I think this is really important. Dr. Waraich, could we talk about the whole stigma that we've been talking about? What are the results of that? Because I think often we think if we bury our heads in the sand, it just means no one's having sex and then we don't have to talk about it and it's all fine. But that's not actually the case, is it? There's lots of people, I think we were talking when we were playing a bit of music around married men who will get HIV because they're playing away from home and then come home, could possibly pass it on to their wives, still not have those conversations. Tell me about some anecdotes about your work.
Sure. So for example, I sometimes see men who essentially have sex with men but may not identify as being gay or bisexual, and they are married to women because they've had to get married, and they have children with these women, and the women now have HIV as well. So often I'll see the woman and then I'll see the man, and it's a very difficult situation to be in because the man is not comfortable in his sexuality. He's in a relationship which can be difficult, and it's really difficult for the women as well, who are incredibly isolated. And I have female patients who haven't told anyone about their HIV apart from their husbands for 15-20 years, so really isolated. I think the other thing I see is kind of the outcome of people not getting tested. So part of my work includes doing ward work, so we see patients who are admitted to hospital who are unwell, and over the last 10 years working in East London, I have seen lots of South Asian patients who have been unwell for a while. Someone's thought about HIV, done an HIV test on them, so maybe their GP or a hospital specialist, and they've come in with advanced HIV and have been very unwell. So seeing kind of that end of things, we're still seeing people who have what would have been called back in the day AIDS-defining conditions, who are at high risk of dying, and it's because they have never had a test before, because no one's thought of offering it to them, or they've never thought they've been at risk.
Of course, I understand. Minna, in the work you do you often get a lot of people angry at the time they've missed out, because maybe if they'd come to this realization sooner, maybe if they'd had the test sooner, maybe if they'd had the conversation earlier, then it would just be a lot more manageable?
I mean, I think it goes back to the idea that people just don't think it's going to be them. Then they don't meet the demographic. They just they don't understand that it can affect them.
It's just not even seen as an option.
It's not seen as an option. That's why they won't go for PrEP or anything like that, or even go for a random HIV test or even an STI test, because they just feel that they're not fit within that category. And these are older women of different communities and Asian women, so the demographic is very diverse with Asian women, across women as well. So because they just feel that it's not going to be them. And I think that's the key issue. But I think there's also an issue around, we just don't talk about positive, good sexual health. We talk about mental health. We talk about diabetes, you just talked about that, and cancer. These things are we can shout out about those, can't we? But I think because there's a taboo around sexual health, and, and I think that needs to really be changed in our communities, in the South Asian communities, that like you go for a, regular MOT for your health checks, sexual health should be part of that process, and we need to begin that dialogue and campaigns that your sexual health is just as equally important. And I think that we just, in particularly with women, I think there is that sexual taboo around it. They just think it's not going to impact them, and so that's why it becomes a bigger shock. And like you said, they get diagnosed quite late. So I think it's just about shifting the attitude and beliefs, and breaking those barriers of fear and shame and guilt that that holds, this very unique, very specific condition, long-term condition. Because if you say, you've got cancer or diabetes or MS, people say, oh, we're really sorry. You can shout about that. You can say that. But if somebody's got HIV, they're not going to shout about it, are they?
They're not.
Because of the fear of rejection or backlash.
Completely. It's amazing to me, Minna, that I imagine there's people up and down the country at the moment who are just thinking, and maybe the penny's just dropped, that even if you're not having conversations in your households about sex, that doesn't mean people aren't having sex.
Well, we're human beings, we're having it, aren't we? We just don't talk about it. I mean, it's a normal human good thing to do. It's a healthy thing to do.
I just really want to, and this is going out, I'm turning the music down because this is going out from me personally to you. That's you there listening right now. People are having sex. I can guarantee it. People are really having sex. They really are. We're going to have to wrap this up in a moment. Raj, I want to come to you, and I want to ask you all the same thing. Raj, if there's one thing that you want people to take away from your experience and from this conversation, what is it? Raj, the nation is listening. Go for it. Oh no, have we lost Raj? That was the wrong time to lose Raj. Let's see if we can get him back before the end. And let's go to Minna first of all.
Okay, so I think what I'd like to say is let's love and not hate. Okay, because we're all diverse in our own communities. That's what makes us, unique, and we learn from each other. So I think, as a well-being coach, for me, it's always about teaching people that see the difference in people and let's bring love into it rather than hate and indifference, because that just separates us. Just because, we're diverse within our own communities, aren't we? There's not one type of Asian. We're not homogeneous, are we? So,
of course.
And, we need to express and have that freedom to be who we are. So let's celebrate, embrace all of us, of all our Asian community, our diversity of who we are. And let's bring the love in. That's what I say.
Thank you. Shamal.
So for me, it's very much about sexual health testing. And if you are having sex, be a responsible, sexually active adult who is going and being responsible and getting tested regularly. There are several ways of getting tested, but something that we were talking about earlier and you picked up on is the fear of going to the sexual health clinic. I had it. Going there, someone will see me from my community, this person will see me, Auntie G will see me, Baba G will see me. Well, if they're there, then we're all there for the same reason, yeah? So let's not worry about what they're going to talk about. If Auntie G's there, why are we worrying? She's not going to go and shout out about it. I think there's a lot of fear around it, and we need to stop that. We need to abolish that. We need to go out there, start getting tested, because there is about 7,800 undiagnosed HIV, people living with HIV in the UK, and we want them to go and get tested, because those are the people who are transferring it on to people who are HIV negative. So go out and get tested and know your status and get onto treatment, and if not, get onto some prevention methods like PrEP, so that you can live your best sexual life you want to.
That is wonderful. Before we come to Dr. Regreshi, I just want to ask, is Raj back? I don't know is Raj on the line?
Yeah, I am, yeah.
Oh, he's back. Okay, brilliant. I thought we lost you there. So, yeah, I was just asking. I want everyone to just really share what you want people to take away from your story and from this conversation tonight. Raj?
HIV doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care about your age, about your race, about your sexuality, about your gender. So, you need to get tested. It can happen to anyone. So, get yourself tested. Look after your sexual health.
Make sure you get tested. Thank you so much, Raj. And final word to you, Doctor.
So I think I want to say that, HIV is not a moral issue. It's just a virus. And we really need to address HIV stigma and know that, even if you know someone living with HIV, it's not what we thought it was in the 80s. They're not going to pass it on to anyone. They're just going to live with a normal chronic disease like other people with chronic diseases.
That is wonderful. All of you, thank you so much for contributing tonight. I feel kind of really privileged to be able to have this conversation, and I think you've all, and we could, it's because you've all shared your amazing experiences, and I'm just really, I think you should all be very, very proud of yourselves.
Thank you.
And I think you should give yourself a round of applause. I really do. Thank you so much. Around the corner, we will be going down in the DMs, where as a team we'll be sorting out your life problems. That is still to come. And just before midnight, we'll be finishing with the happy ending. This is Joy Crooks.
Thunder clouds when you walk in, but I never feel the drip when you're talking. Only meet me in the drought when you're falling. How I like my eggs in the morning. Taking comfort in my shadow, but you seem to stay afloat, 'cause you're shallow. You can never make a promise for tomorrow, 'cause all the time you choose to take has been borrowed. I just pull up, then skirt. You just pull up when it hurts. Why? I just pull up, then skirt. You just pull up when it hurts. Why? Wants to creep into my window. Now I got you back in my arms. Now I'm moving from the shadows. Daylight wants to creep into my window. Now I got you back in my arms. Now I'm moving from the shadows. Sun the clouds, so I'm walking. I don't need to take a hit from your talking. When the hurricane comes, I'm on back roads. When the hurricane comes, you do not know. Oh, I feel the clouds of change when I'm riding in my spaceship. Calling out your rain, 'cause it's no one's time to soak it. You left me hopeless, swimming in your ocean. Got me thinking twice what I'm involved in. I just pull up, then skirt. You just pull up when it hurts. Why? I just pull up, then skirt. You just pull up when it hurts. Why? Daylight wants to creep into my window. Now I got you back in my arms. Now I'm moving from the shadows. Daylight wants to creep into my window. Now I got you back in my arms. Now I'm moving from the shadows. So I just pull up, then skirt. You just pull up when it hurts. Why? Pull up, then skirt. Pull up when it hurts. Pull up, then skirt. Pull up when it hurts. Pull up, then skirt. Pull up when it hurts. Pull up.
Casa along. Every morning on Asian Network, it's the big debate.
It's our voice collectively.
Where we focus on the big issues affecting British Asians.
It was tense.
The hot topics on our minds.
Doesn't really matter.
Viewpoints from every side.
Couldn't help feeling sad.
Also, you get to have your say on the matters affecting us all.
I know, that's how I feel anyway.
That is completely true, and I completely agree.
Casa along. The big debate, weekday mornings from 10 on BBC Asian Network.
Je ne veux pas de ton pardon. De ton pardon.
I don't need your love. I don't need the fake apologies to know you'll do it all again. I don't need the hate running through your veins. I don't need your love when you know it's fake. Ooh, la 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 la. I don't have time for you. I'm busy making money moves. Why you mad at what I do? Oh na 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 na. Don't hate on what I got. I won't waste my time on you. It's cool. Alhamdulillah, lillah, as-salama. I'm better without you and your drama. Alhamdulillah, lillah, as-salama. Give all my salam, salam to your karma. Alhamdulillah, as-salama. Alhamdulillah, as-salama. I do what I want. I know this what I like. Do I make you mad when you see me shine? I've already won. I'm who I wanna be. If you still don't understand, بحكي لك بالعربي. Ooh, la 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 la. Don't have time for you. Busy making money moves. Why you mad at what I do? Oh na 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 na. Hate on what I got. I won't waste my time on you. Je ne veux pas de ton pardon. Alhamdulillah, as-salama. Alhamdulillah, as-salama. Alhamdulillah, as-salama.
Mobeen Azhar.
On BBC Asian Network.
Tiger Style. Yeah, Slick Relax. LJD. Long shot. Konica.
किसे बहाने आवे हानिया ना सानू तड़पावे हानिया किसे बहाने आवे हानिया ना सानू तड़पावे हानिया ना कर हुड़ दिल गीर कुर्ती मल मल दीन आपा छड़े शरीर कुर्ती मल मल दीन आपा छड़े शरीर कुर्ती मल मल दीन
पहला कुड़ी ये नहीं सी जानदी कट के काल ना लगी हाणदी पहला कुड़ी ये नहीं सी जानदी कट के काल ना लगी हाणदी करके कोल करार कन विच गल करदी पतली नरम चीनार कन विच गल करदी पतली नरम चीनार कन विच गल करदी
I like what you say. Got me hooked, the shirt was so straight. I like the feel of the feel where we laying it. Face up to the sky like a parade. I'm like, OMG, Trinity. From the beat, I hear a thing that you do to me. I won't stop, get me hot, ain't no cool to me. Cool to we gon' need some security.
कल तड़पा दे ओले ओ मेरा नरम काल जा डोले कल तड़पा दे ओले ओ मेरा नरम काल जा डोले पहली बार जब बैठ तेरे कोल दिल गए मर के बोले खातो ना ओले हन्नी खातो ना ओले हन्नी और तेरी तस्वीर कुर्सी मल मल दीन आपा छड़े शरीर कुर्सी मल मल दीन आपा छड़े शरीर कुर्सी मल मल दीन
21 साल दी सारी रक पतला बदन दी भारी 21 साल दी सारी रक पतला बदन दी भारी फुल्ल वांगू तर जाएंगे नी अड़ियां राम तेरा नाल यारी सपने दे विच रही खेड़दी सपने दे विच रही खेड़दी करके हार शिंगार कन विच गल करगी पतले नरम चीनार कन विच गल करगी
आपा छड़ी शरीर कुर्सी मल मल दीन
पतली नरम चीनार कन विच गल करगी पतली नरम चीनार कन विच गल करगी
Let's go.
This is Mobeen Azhar live on the BBC Asian Network. I almost missed where my mic was then and went flying across the studio on my chair, which has wheels on it. But don't worry, because I'm fine. So tonight we were talking about HIV and living with HIV and stigma, and a shout out to everyone that shared their story and took part today. We're going to have a little debrief. I've got Amani and Kaya with me. Can I just mention Kaya's had her hair done? Amani had her hair done last week.
Kaya looks so beautiful.
She looks-
So do you. If there was cameras.
And Mobeen has a bandana on.
So I haven't actually done my hair today.
So is that why you wear a bandana?
I just, you know, when I haven't actually done my hair, I just wear a bandana.
I bet it looks good anyway.
And by the way, Mobeen, this is the new hair crew, so it's new us, so you kind of need to
So I
join
need a
us.
new haircut.
You need a new haircut. I think you should dye the quiff.
Maybe dye it.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll come in with a dyed quiff tomorrow. You
And do
never
it
know.
Asian Network pink.
Ah, that'd be nice.
Not
wouldn't it?
blonde.
Not blonde. Blonde is so.
It's
Yeah.
so
Hang
it's
on a
so
minute, I
normal.
Kaya, honestly.
Yeah, God, it's so like
normal.
Oh, whatever.
Kaya, you're a disaster. No, I'm kidding. Okay, so let's be nice about Kaya's amazing hair and Emily's nice hair. What do you think you learnt tonight? Kaya.
I think I thought you were going to go to Emily first.
I know you did. Go on.
Do you know what? I don't know if this is just ignorance, but I didn't actually know, or maybe it is my luck. I feel quite embarrassed saying
No,
this.
please be open and honest.
I didn't know that women or heterosexual men were likely to get affected by HIV.
You just didn't think they were?
I didn't think they were, like, I didn't think it was as massive a bigger problem as, you know, you label that the statistics, but I thought it was like a very small group, a really, really tiny group.
Right.
It obviously is a really tiny group, but we're here having this conversation, and you're having that conversation where, like, you're saying when you had Mina speak about women who haven't spoken to their parents or any, like Dr. Is it Rajeshri? Rajeshri said that, you know, women have been hiding 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's quite shocking. That's, like, really shocking in terms of, like, how it's impacting their mental health.
Completely. And you've got to remember, HIV infection is often to do with the exchange of bodily fluids.
Mm.
So blood and semen. Now, and vaginal fluid.
Yeah.
And as men release more fluid during sex, that's why men are more likely to pass it on. But men, as we heard from Raj, can
also
become infected, and, you know, women can. And so there you go.
But I think one thing was really important, like, in terms of symptoms, like Raj said that he didn't actually find any, like, he got, because he was a blood donor.
Yeah, he didn't.
That's the only way he found out. So, I mean, is there any sort of inkling to find out, is there any symptoms out there, like, people can look out for?
No, so I don't, for many people it's symptomless for a really, really, really long time, actually. So that's why you feeling fine is not a reason not to get tested. You just need to get tested.
But how would you ever know something's wrong then?
You wouldn't, I think the point is, if you're having sex...
Yeah, just get tested.
Just get tested.
Yeah.
Everyone should be getting tested.
Yeah.
And, you know, it can be any kind of sex with anyone, because people with HIV don't have a label on their forehead, so you should just get tested, I reckon. Emily?
So you might think I'm being really, like, naive, but...
I love the way you're both starting off in exactly the same way. Go on.
She just likes to copy me.
So I just remember back in the day, and I mean years and years, like over 10 years ago, a long time ago, in EastEnders there was a character who had AIDS.
Yes.
And I just remember him telling everyone, and he was pretty much like dying, and that was it. And that was the only ever time that I ever heard of the word AIDS.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I feel like no one really spoke about it. So what I learned from EastEnders, even though it was so long ago, was my only time that I was exposed to what AIDS is or what could be. And now that the guests have said, like, yeah, there's no cure, but there's medicine that you can take, I didn't even know that, because no one talks about it. I don't see it on TV anymore, you know, and...
I also think that when you mention AIDS, I mean, I know when I was planning the show, I can't tell you how many times around the office or even on the phone, oh yeah, is it what Freddie Mercury had?
Really?
Yeah. And it's like, yeah.
Oh.
That's what people were assuming. Literally, I can't even count how many times I got that comment.
That's absolutely amazing to me, and I feel it's all the more reason this show's important.
Yeah.
I think throughout the show it made me a little bit sad thinking about all those women, like, that can't say anything, because I feel like the Asian community would just be like, oh, well, they're slagging around.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all they'll assume, and that's it.
I also,
yeah.
You know, like you said, back in the day, I've actually, even though I wasn't born in the 80s, I've actually seen that tombstone.
The tombstone advert, which is...
You always see, it's quite haunting.
Of course it is, it really is. I need to say, if you have been affected by any of the issues we spoke about tonight, there were references earlier as well. Shamal, I think, very bravely spoke about having suicidal thoughts. If you've been affected by that, or you want some advice, or you are worried about getting your STI test, or you've been diagnosed with HIV, any of these issues, then go to bbc.co.uk/Action 9. There is a wealth of information there. Guys, you ready to go down in the DMs?
After a song.
After a song, okay, first. Let's have a team first. Here we go. This is Jazz Down, me and Kanika Kapoor.
Yeah,